The Pilgrimage of the Heart podcast is brought to you by PYO.yoga, an online studio for all your yoga needs, including videos in Spanish and Russian. This podcast is also brought to you by Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga, located in San Diego and serving over 1,000 yogis a week.
Welcome to Pilgrimage of the Heart interviews. Join us as we explore fascinating people and ideas in the world of yoga. Hi, this is Sujantra with Pilgrimage Yoga Online and Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga. Welcome to our podcast interview series. Today, our guest is Beryl Birch. She is the director of the Hard and Soft Yoga Institute and is also the best-selling author of several books on yoga, including Power Yoga and the just-released Yoga for Warriors, a book on yoga for veterans. Yoga Journal named her one of 7 American women who are, quote, innovators shaping yoga today. Beryl is a former biofeedback researcher with a degree in English and philosophy from Syracuse University. She has been an avid student of classical yoga, meditation, and the study of consciousness since 1971. She is a longtime leader in speaking out on the critical importance of spiritual revolution, the combination of activism and yoga practice. She is also the co-founder of the Give Back Yoga Foundation, which supports yoga teachers worldwide in developing give back projects in their communities. Beryl, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, Sujantra, it's such a delight to be here. I always enjoy so much talking to like-minded spiritual seekers, and it's just so much fun to me to think that you and I can have just a connected conversation. You're in California, I'm in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts, and here we are.
Yes. And to start at the beginning, how did your journey into the realms of yoga and self-exploration begin?
Oh my, how long is this interview? I think it must have carried over from previous lifetimes, because and I don't mean sound off.
Did you say previous life? I like sure. That. So you believe and feel the energy of reincarnation? Well,
I think, yeah, absolutely. Nice. I think it's Buddha says that we've lived 10,000 lifetimes, and I don't think he was speaking figuratively, although, I was going to say I wasn't there. I can't say, but quite probably I was there as one of his students. And I think I've been a student of classical yoga and Buddhism since the early 70s, and I think if you spend a long time studying and look at the teachings, it just seems that this whole idea of samsara, or this cycle of birth and death and rebirth, is pretty well integrated into a lot of the Eastern wisdom traditions. So I don't even think of it being as something simply a worldview or belief. I think it's something that for me is as fundamental as gravity. But, I know not everyone shares that perspective, but that's pretty much been borne out by my own experience over the years.
And I think the idea of reincarnation, or having that feeling or belief, can greatly shift how we look at our lives and what we give importance to.
Human birth is thought of in most of the Eastern traditions as such a sacred opportunity. I love this quote from the Dalai Lama, and I say it to myself every morning when I wake up. Every day, think, when you first wake up, I'm alive. I have a precious human life, and I will not waste this day. And then, just paraphrasing, he goes on and says, I will direct all my efforts toward improving myself for the benefit of all beings everywhere. And I think ultimately our yoga practice is get us around to that perspective, that we realize what really makes us happy is not accumulating a lot of stuff, not a relationship, not a job, not anything in the world of form, not anything external, but really what makes us happy is making other people happy.
And your biography says that you began having an interest in all of the meditation and the biofeedback in 1971. I'm curious, how old were you when this interest came forward?
How old was I? I think 71. I was 29. But from the time I was a little child, I was very connected to nature. I would sit out in the woods and collect acorns and pine cones and stones and have fantasy little imaginary friends, most of whom were animals. I had my 3 totem spirit guides were all animals, and I've had them from a very early age. And I moved to California from New York City, which is where I was born, and I grew up in New Jersey. I moved to California in the early 70s, and oh my gosh, that was the hotbed of the human potential movement. You couldn't be in California in the early 70s without some of that metaphysical energy sort of rubbing off on you. And I think I wrote about this in one of my books, is that one of my Siberian Huskies just walked in and jumped up on the couch, and I know she's getting ready to start barking at me. And I was going to a lecture with Baba Ram Dass at UCLA campus in Los Angeles, and tripped up some steps and sat down on the steps to kind of reflect and gather myself, and I saw this little poster for a yoga class with Yogi Bhajan. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'd sort of heard vaguely about yoga in college, but, that was the 60s, and there weren't a lot of people doing yoga in college in the 60s. And so I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So that was my very, very first asana class. But I was already, reading books like Be Here Now and the psychedelic, what was the psychedelic experience, the book by Ram Dass and Ralph Metzner and Timothy Leary, and
not Be Here
in
Now.
California in the early 70s, you were totally into consciousness studies one way or another.
And was there a particular moment in those early years of practice where you really came to know and experience the power of yoga?
It wasn't so much yoga. I started, what I find happens today is that when we tend to use the word yoga sort of synonymously with the word asana, and when people say, I haven't done yoga all week, what they mean is they haven't done asana, but they may very well have been practicing yoga. There are a lot of ways to practice yoga, whether it's through chanting or praying or meditation or breathing or even service. It's basically Patanjali in classical yoga regards practice, or the word abhyasa, as making an effort to keep your mind steady. So I always ask my students, if that's the definition of practice, when can we practice? And basically we can practice 24/7. And I was not aware of the 8-limb path in the 70s. I had the good fortune to meet Choyam Trungpa Rinpoche and my teacher Muni Sri Chitrabhanu, who was a Jain monk that had just come to this country, and learned meditation in 71 from both of those teachers. And so the Jain tradition, the Buddhist tradition were very closely aligned, and many of their methodologies were very similar. So I've been meditating for 45 years. But I did, I did that asana class with Yogi Bhajan. I thought it was okay. And I took over the years in the California, and I moved to Colorado in 74 and took a lot of asana classes with a lot of the Iyengar teachers and did workshops, and was interested in it, but I didn't make the connection between asana and meditation until 1980 when I moved back to New York and found the Ashtanga Yoga Asana system, and my teacher, Norman Allen, he gave me a copy of the Yoga Sutra, and I went, oh, I see how this works. So I would say I had a very significant spiritual experience in California in about 1970, probably 73 or 74. But I couldn't exactly say it was because of doing asana, or it was an extraordinary experience. But yoga didn't begin to transform my life until 1980 on.
And speaking of that transformation, there's a beautiful passage in your book, Beyond Power Yoga. So first you wrote Power Yoga, which spread power yoga and the what we can derive from the asana practice, and then in Beyond Power Yoga you really explore the 8 limbs. And I was wondering if you could read to our audience. You have a beautiful paragraph called The Awakening.
Oh, bless your heart. Yeah, that's Beyond Power Yoga is probably my favorite of all my books because it explores the whole 8-limb path. Power Yoga was just about asana, and it was just about, in fact, that book got me thrown out of the Ashtanga church because I called it Power Yoga, and you know, maybe that's why Yoga Journal called me an innovator, because I was working with athletes in New York City, and I realized that, you know, in order that they could benefit tremendously from this very rajasic, active athletic practice, but that most of them couldn't do most of the postures because they were too tight, so I had to do a lot of variation and modification. But because of all the early Iyengar training, I was very conscious of eye alignment and, avoidance of injury, and so I was happy to write Beyond Power Yoga because I was eager to take people into the other 7 limbs. Yeah, let me see if I can find this here. The Awakening, the law of karma. All the spiritual disciplines talk about awakening. What is an awakening? What do we mean when we say we are awake? Henry David Thoreau said that to be awake is to be alive. Well, what exactly does that mean? I think to be awake is to be conscious of the fact that we are actually in control of our lives, that we create our own reality. I think we wake up the instant we understand the universal law of cause and effect and realize that we shape our lives moment to moment by our actions, by what we say, think, and do.
So for you, yoga is really about that, taking ownership and realizing what a magical world this is, and we create our lives.
You know, that's absolutely true. And as I read this, I look at it and go, to be we understand cause and effect and realize that we shape our lives moment to moment. I think to go a little deeper with that is that's really what, well, for example, one of the reasons I think yoga is so effective in all its practices for veterans, for example, or anybody struggling with trauma, because, you know, as we go through life, as we create our lives, we're being affected by our samskaras, the impressions that have been imprinted on our energy fields as we've gone along. And I think that as we go forward, we're creating more samskaras. Everything we do, whether negative or positive, creates, I think, an impression. It's almost like a thumbprint on a pane of glass. And our practices are to eventually become free of the influence of our samskara and of our karma, and to dig out not just negative impressions, and this can go back not just to last week, but to our childhood, to previous births, where we're really trying to be free to act without any influence from past actions. And It's fascinating to me. I think this whole idea of the 8-limb path is such a brilliant methodology that it takes us from very gross levels of awareness, which is kind of where we are when we begin with asana. We stumble into an asana class and we might be a little clumsy and we think we're going to stretch out our hamstrings or to be more flexible or to relax, and 6 months or a year later we're suddenly asking about, we might ask our teacher, well, what do you know about meditation? That it changes, it transforms our life and I think that happens because all of the practices train us to pay attention. And it's in that act of learning to pay attention that we become more conscious, we become more aware, and I think that's the process of waking up. When we're awake, you realize that you have a choice every moment. Is this making sense?
Oh yes, it's I very much like the way you're putting it.
I think that awareness that we have a choice, and as we develop the witness with this watching, whether you're in asana class and you're watching yourself, you're trying to focus on your breath or your locks or your alignment, and all of a sudden you notice that you're, admiring the T-shirt on the person next to you, and you think, wow, that's pretty nice. Where'd you get that? I want one of those. And all of a sudden you're off shopping, and at some point you realize, that for me is the magical moment, that second you realize you're not here, you're off shopping, and you bring your attention back to the present moment. And so it's that constant struggle. That's what Patanjali calls abhyasa, or practice, that effort to be present. So whether you're doing pranayama or asana or chopping carrots or, meditating, you're working to be in this moment to moment awareness, just pure awareness. And I think the more you practice that, it's like learning to run a marathon. You don't decide you're going to run a marathon and go out and try and run 26 miles. You kind of have to build up to it. And I think the same thing happens with our yoga practices. We start with asana and we start to work out some of these toxins and tightness, and we clean off some of the soot from the globe, where the light's been burning, but it's been, the soot on the inside of the lamp sort of obscures the light. That's a pretty famous metaphor in yoga, literature. And so these practices burn toxins, and the more subtle the practices, the deeper they go into the subconscious and unconscious mind, and digging out the samskaras. But now, I'm just fascinated by the methodology. You mentioned the marathon, and the marathon, of course, has a goal to complete the race. And in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the practices point towards the experience of samadhi. And I heard you mention samadhi in one of your YouTube videos. So I was wondering if you could express to us how you explain the consciousness of samadhi. I don't think you can. I think it's an experience. It's kind of like, I don't know, what could we make it, be like trying to explain to someone what an LSD trip was like, or taking, what, it's beyond ordinary consciousness, and it's not conceptual. It's like we struggle the same thing with trying to explain God, so we name God. We say, well, let's call God Ishvara, or let's call God this, or call God that, and then we argue about whose God is a better God. I love in the sutra where Patanjali says, well, let's say that what represents God is a sound, is the sound of the pranava, the sound of Om. And you go, wow, that's pretty smart. Patanjali is using sound as a way to get around naming God. That's pretty cool. I think the experience of samadhi is the experience of yoga. And I don't think we can yoga is an experience. When Patanjali says, yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind, or the stilling of the patternings of consciousness, that I don't think that's a definition. It's like he's saying, if you can be successful in quieting your mind, it might give you the opportunity to have the experience of yoga. But yoga is what happens when you quiet your mind. And I don't feel like I can teach anybody yoga. I don't think anybody can. All we can do is give our students a map and say, look, I'll give you a set of instructions. Follow this set of instructions and good luck. I hope this will take you to the experience. So for me, the experience of Samadhi is beyond anything you can talk about. It's an experience. And I think people often have little glimpses of it. I don't think it's that elusive. I think, that you can have a peak experience, as Maslow called it, and it might be a low-level samadhi, where you have this experience of deep connectedness or deep boundlessness, and you go, wow, what was that? I mean, and I think that once you have the experience, you can communicate with other people that have had the experience, and you just kind of look at each other and go, oh yeah, and you I don't think you hang out there all the time. I don't think even great spiritual leaders hang out in Samadhi all the time. It's in some ways, it's so close at hand, and we think of it as being so far away. What does Patanjali say? For those who are earnest in their practice, it sits nearby.
Right.
Well, that's encouraging, right?
Right. I read in Shivananda once, he said that there's 3 times when a person goes into Samadhi. Once is through the meditation practice. Once is in that moment between waking and sleeping, that little thing you cross, that little space you cross through. And then once is something about when you receive a shock in life, like when a father finds out his son has died, or just when the whole world freezes for a moment. And when there's no mind and you're just in that beautiful space. Now, you said something interesting that I wanted to go back to. When we were talking earlier, you were talking about your own practice, that you like to get up early in the morning and meditate. And I was wondering if you could, or practice your yoga. I was wondering if you could inspire us a little bit with what your daily practice looks like after all of these years.
My daily practice is just life. My practice is life, really. I do have formal practices. I do get up in the morning and light some candles and sit for 15, 20, 30 minutes, depending on how much time I have. It's a wonderful way for me to get grounded and get centered. And so often, we hit and I remember so much earlier in my life, you just hit the ground running. I got to do this, I got to do that. We're never really here. When we're getting up, we're thinking about being in the shower. When we're in the shower, we're thinking about what we're going to eat, or driving to work, or, oh my God, we're eating on the way to work, and we get to work, and it's like, oh my God, when is it going to be Friday, or when is my yoga class? And,
right,
so
we're always moving ahead.
It's always never with ourselves. And in our teacher training programs, which I have running in about 6 different states now.
And this is related to your the Hard
and Soft Yoga Institute.
Right, and
that's my school.
Your school, and is it a studio where there's classes, or it's a teacher training school?
It's a teacher training school.
Okay, and you have in 6 different states, you said. 6
Correct.
different cities.
And
wow.
I have a pretty extensive faculty of people that I've trained, all of whom have over 1,000 hours of study with me. So we've been around for 15, 20 years. Just brilliant teachers who are, deeply experienced.
And is there a certain focus to because you've been through you've learned from Iyengar, from Pattabhi Jois, is there a certain focus at your school?
Yeah, I focus on teaching Ashtanga, the 8-limb path, not necessarily Ashtanga asana vinyasa system, although that's my practice, and that's what, for example, all my books are based on
right.
the Ashtanga asana sequences, whether Power Yoga is the primary series. Beyond Power Yoga is the next 3 books are all a combination of the first and second series in Ashtanga. So, but it's tricky to, one of the first things I teach people is be aware that you don't have to do Pattabhi Joyce's asana system to say you're an Ashtanga yogi. Iyengar was an Ashtanga yogi. He looked back to the Yoga Sutra as the source of his teaching. Swami Satchidananda, the Swami Shivananda, Swami Vishnu Devananda were all Ashtanga yogis. They were all practitioners of and followers of classical yoga. So, what asana system you do matters less to me than this idea of learning to, learning the history and the philosophy and I do use the Ashtanga sequence with some modifications and leaving out a few of the more difficult postures as a basic sequence because I think it's a good sequence. I think the sequencing in the first and second series, particularly, which is the most accessible to the general public, is great sequencing. I think but it's certainly not the only way to do asana.
Right. And so at your school, there's a really well-rounded study of the sutras and how that all connects with our day-to-day life.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Do you have a favorite? Because for myself, I also love the Yoga Sutras, and my favorite translation is by Swami Vivekananda, the Raja Yoga. I'm wondering.
I love that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I really feel like when he talks about how you become invisible, it feels like he has the first-hand experience there. But I
always tell my students that's the only city that I've mastered is becoming invisible, and then I'll ask them, can you see me? See, we could probably convince all your listeners now that I've mastered this because none of them can see me, right? Right,
you're invisible, but we hear you, we don't see you. What is there a translation or translations that you recommend?
What do I like? What translations do you like? I love Chip Hartranft's translation. Mm-hmm. He's quite an impressive scholar, but his translation is much more accessible than someone like Georg Feuerstein. That would certainly be a translation I would not recommend people get for the first time out. Otherwise, they'll fall asleep on page 1. And he was such a gifted scholar, but so difficult to understand.
That's challenging.
What else do I like? I like Swami Satchidananda for beginners. It's a good one to start with. I love Mukunda Stiles' translation. I also like Alberto Violdo, who's a shaman and an anthropologist, and it's not a translation, it's much more interpretive, but it's just delightful. The way we study the sutra in my school is that we use about 15 different translations. Iyengar's translation, Barbara Stoller Miller, Nishala Joy Devi, Desikachar. I love Heart of Yoga. I love Desikachar's translation. It's very, very practical. I like Edwin Bryant's translation. I like Jagannath Carrera's translation. He was a student of Swami Satchidananda. I think my favorite might be Chip Hartranft, but I wouldn't recommend that as a starter. I would recommend Satchidananda's as a starter.
And is there one day going to be Beryl Birch's translation on the Yoga Sutras?
I don't think so.
That might be a nice idea.
I don't think so. I don't feel, I've been a student for a long time, but I'm not a Sanskrit scholar. And, there are so many people that are so deeply studied in Sanskrit. I just realized, in the last, couple months that I've been butchering Sanskrit pronunciation for years. So now I'm just working on trying to clean up some of my pronunciation. I have a good friend, Graham Schweig, who did a wonderful translation. He's a brilliant scholar, a Sanskrit scholar, Harvard educated. He's in the Virginia Beach area. And I'll go and say something to him, and he'll just grab his heart and roll his eyes. He goes, "Oh, Beryl, no, you didn't just say that." I go, "Oh, Graham, I'm sorry. Did I do it again?" no BBB.
Okay, so we can let go of the Sanskrit translator, but I'm really intrigued by your spiritual activism. So you have your Give Back Yoga Foundation. I went to the website and looked at all the bright, shiny faces and pictures.
Oh my God, we're doing such incredible work. It's amazing.
Yeah, and
it's a great organization. We founded it with one of my students, Rob Schwer, in 2007, and he's our executive director. He's just taken it into the stratosphere. We are doing so much great work in prisons and working with young girls with eating disorders, working with veterans, the mindful yoga therapy program. I'm developing yoga for first responders, which is, again, using my book, Yoga for Warriors. But imagine there's so many people interested in this now. I mean, I would love to hear from people that are either teaching in their local fire departments or police departments or working with veterans. I'm really trying to get free copies of my Yoga for Warriors book out to every military person in the country. And it's, we're always trying to do fundraising and sell books, but so that we can give books away to veterans.
I saw that on the website. That's a really beautiful offering to give that to people.
I'm a big documentary fan, and I show documentaries at all my workshops and all of my teacher training programs, whether it's The Cove or Blackfish, whether it's, about animals or Ghosts in Our Machine or Earthlings or many of the fantastic food documentaries like Food Chains or Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead or Food Inc. or Forks Over Knives or A Place at the Table. I mean, there are just there's so many great documentaries, and then there are all the good documentaries on water, tapped and flow and blue gold. It just helps with the awakening process. Every time I watch a documentary, I think I just tighten it up a little bit. I'm a little more mindful and a little, just a little lighter on my feet and a little more grateful to Mother Earth. And, it's just, you don't think, for example, if somebody goes to the store and they buy Nestle's chocolate chips to make chocolate chip cookies, you don't realize that the company Nestle owns Perrier and Poland Springs and Pellegrino, and Nestle is basically stealing water from people in Michigan and Maine and, taking water out of the ground free and pumping it out in huge volumes, bottling it, and selling it back to us.
Right.
And this whole idea of plastic bottles, I mean, how did we ever manage, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, everybody didn't have to walk around with a plastic bottle in their hand. We drank out of water fountains and
which brings me to another question that occurred to me this morning is, how do you've done so much with yoga, and obviously you can do yoga and get into a very, very peaceful place within yourself. How do you reconcile that inner feeling with all the violence and darkness we see in the world around us? How come the world isn't transforming more quickly as we've been able to transform ourselves?
I have no idea. I mean, we talk about that every single workshop, every class when people hang around, every teacher training, it's this battle, and I think I talked to you just before we started our interview that, if it's so encouraging to me, people ask me all the time, are you a pessimist or an optimist? And I go, well, I talk to people like Sujantra or go to teacher training my programs or hang out with the people that are studying, and they're so conscious and so mindful and so working so hard to make the world a better place. And I feel kind of optimistic, like, yeah, maybe we'll, and then, you get out in the world and you go, forget it. We're doomed as a species. I personally do think that we are going to go extinct as a species. We're wiping out. Extinction is there's a great new documentary that just came out called Chasing Extinction. And I've known for years that we have, I don't know, let's forget the numbers now, but huge numbers of species going extinct every year. And why we think that, arrogant enough to think that we are, exempt from the possibility of extinction. But I don't think it matters. I think the Earth will continue, whether we're here or not, probably do a little better without the human species in many ways. But I think the work we're doing is important. Satchidananda always used to say, just do the work. Just do the work. You don't wait around for the rewards to see if, the mango seed you planted is a tree yet and bearing fruit. You do the work, and it carries over into the next lifetimes, and there's joy in doing the work. That's Kriya Yoga. That's the path of. I think. I also think it's kind of interesting to me, to see this idea of while we're talking, this is right around the time when Donald Trump announced that he thinks all Muslims should be kept out of the country, and even some of the most radical Republicans or conservative Republicans have said that's really not what our country's about. And I think it sort of depends. What is your what are you tapped into? Are you tapped into fear-based consciousness and poverty consciousness, like there's not, living in fear and getting a gun, thinking that a gun is the only way to protect yourself? Or are you tapped into prosperity consciousness and love consciousness and realizing that there's a higher authority than guns? And if you tap into, the higher authority, the universe, I feel, kind of takes care of you. And I don't know, that doesn't really explain innocent people getting shot or getting killed has been happening in this country. But
well, I like what you said about staying focused on, or not just focused on it, but when you interact with uplifted people or yogis or people practicing yoga, there's a spirit of optimism, and I think focusing on that keeps is a great energy to carry in this world, the optimistic, and also what you said about that we create our worlds when we're talking about karma. I think those two things together can give us all hope and positive energy moving forward.
Exactly, and we talk about that in yoga. That's viveka, this discernment, the discrimination, not in a negative sense, but being mindful of what you do with your energy. And you just, as they say in financial circles, you don't throw good money after bad. Well, you don't throw good energy after bad. That's the whole purpose of developing the witness in our practices, is you learn to see what you're doing with your prana. And you become it becomes more sacred. You become more mindful of not, just casting your prana out like, on barren fields that won't yield productivity, spiritual productivity, so that you kind of save your prana to be around people that are uplifting. I mean, that's the first thing that people ask. I just taught a 6-day workshop at Kripalu here in Massachusetts, and one of the women said, "Oh my God, my family, there's so much drama in my family." She said, "What do I do when this is over?" And I said, "It's not over. It's not over. This is, you're going to take these practices home with you and learn how to use them. That's why we have all these yoga tools, is that, when you're stressed out or when you're confronted by stress or discomfort or tragedy or difficulty or what I call disturbance in the field, you just stop. You take a breath. You go, okay, this seems to be what's happening right now, and I can't really argue with reality. Well, I can, but I'm not going to win it, so I might as well just take a breath, hunker down, and say, okay, what's next, Can I, and this whole idea of just taking a breath. and learning to be content with what is. That doesn't mean you let the world run over you. You just lie down and go, oh, well, there's nothing I can do. It means in this moment, I accept, for example, that there are still orcas that are imprisoned at SeaWorld. And I do everything I can to encourage people not to go to SeaWorld, not to support SeaWorld, not to, after I show the movie, I usually have a group of people ready to grab their pitchforks and torches
head to San Diego.
SeaWorld, march to San Diego or Orlando, but I try to cultivate compassion for the people that, and I don't mean this to sound arrogant, you try to cultivate compassion for maybe people that don't see that animals have feelings and animals' lives are as valuable as ours. And that we aren't, there's another great documentary called Speciesism, which speaks to this issue really, really brilliantly.
Actually, I saw that movie. That is a brilliant.
Isn't that great? Wasn't he fabulous?
Yeah, that we're one of the species, just like all the rest of them.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Well, Beryl, it's been we're just about out of time, but it's been really, really inspiring hearing your optimism and all your insights into yoga and how we can all grow and learn and live together and hopefully keep this species going.
I am just so grateful. I'm so grateful for, where I am and my teachers, my students, and my home, and sitting here with a fire in the fireplace, and just grateful there's no snow here yet, watching, the snowy scenes on TV or something, but I just feel so fortunate, and all of us in this country, we may be confronted with some, terrible loss and tragedy, but I hate to see fear just take over this country, and I think that we need to just that's why I think it's so great. Everybody's studying yoga, practicing yoga, teaching yoga. If we start teaching yoga in all the police departments and fire departments and in the military, who knows what could happen?
Yeah, I like that. Who knows? A lot can happen, and I think we can help to make it happen. And so to find out more about the beautiful work you do, it's at www.givebackyoga.org.
Right, or BerylBenderBirch.com.
BerylBenderBirch.com or GiveBackYoga.org to connect with you and all of the wonderful things you have going.
So much fun. All the best to you in your wonderful studio. Next time I'm in San Diego, I'll come have a meal at your wonderful vegetarian restaurant. What's the name of it?
That's a deal. It's Bengali, Jyoti Bihanga. Jyoti Bihanga, the soul bird of light is the name.
Oh, given. Yum.
Yeah, I spent 27 years studying with a teacher by the name of Sri Chinmoy, and he gave.
I know the teachings of Sri Chinmoy so well because I worked with so many runners for so many years.
Oh, sure, all the great spiritual runners of the Sri Chinmoy Center, all the ultra marathons, and yeah.
Well, you had a wonderful teacher.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful to have that connection. He gave the nice talk about being an optimist in life and that the source of life is joy and bliss, and if you're connected with that, you'll stay an optimist no matter what you see going on around you. So I think it was really nice, the things you said.
Exactly. Dalai Lama says, someone asked him, what is our ultimate purpose? And he said, well, to be happy. And I thought he was going to say to help reduce suffering, but he said to be happy. And if you don't know the Dalai Lama, you could think, well, that's a little self-serving. But really, when you look at what is it that makes us happy, and it ultimately comes down to making other people happy and seeing other people prosper and be successful and be content and enjoy their lives. And, I think that spot where Patanjali says, cultivate joy, cultivate loving kindness, cultivate compassion, cultivate, and equipoise, karuna, upeksha, cultivate upeksha, it's just, that not disturbed by the errors of others. That's a great way to to deal with the difficulties in life, that you just realize, okay, well, I wouldn't exactly do it this way, but okay. Right. But you're right, staying in touch with joy and loving kindness, I think, keeps you. That's a good answer to that.
This is Sujantra for Pilgrimage Yoga Online, and we're really grateful to have had Beryl Birch with us today, and we encourage you to check out all of the websites we've mentioned today, the givebackyoga.org and berylbenderbirch.com, pyo.yoga, and the Pilgrimage Yoga Online. So thank you once again for tuning in and listening, and we look forward to seeing you at our next interview. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga. Join us at our studios here in San Diego, or visit us online at pyo.yoga. Namaste.